After the winnowing, there's shifa. We'll see the pictures in a minute. A person runs his palms over the kernels. That's called shifa, like rubbing it, and pounds the kernels with his fist. That's be'ita. This loosens the bran layers. So in other words, after the chaff has been removed, you want to get the bran off. So first, you do shifa. You rub it with your hand surface, and then you do be'ita. You punch it, and that accomplishes loosening of the bran, which you want to remove. The kernel is placed in a bean mill that's going to grind it by going around and around. The grinding stones of this mill are adjusted loosely so that they only break off the loosened bran layer and split the kernels into the parts that become kamach and soles. Remember, the kamach is the regular flour and the soles is the superior flour. And the reason why the grinding stones, which normally bust kernel and grind it all the way down into flour when it's set tight, but it's set loose now because we don't want to crush it into flour. We just want to break the bran off and split the kernel into pieces that will form the components of the soles and the kamach. So this mill actually does not grind the kernels into flour because you set it on a loose setting. So you can see the mill here going around and around. That's the bean mill, and you put the kernels in and the portions come out. Not flour coming out, but it's just broken pieces of kernel with the bran loosened off. Now, thick sieves remove the bran from the split kernels. That's the first stage of sifting. Now, finer sieves in a subsequent stage separate the superior soles from the regular kamach. So in the sifting, the first step is to get the bran out and be remaining with only the good parts of the kernel. Stage 2 of the sifting is to sieve the soles, the better flour, away from the kamach, the inferior flour. The soles part, the best part, is then going to be ground in a flour mill. This produces the soles flour because the soles part is still a granule form. It's a portion of the kernel, just broken off. Now you grind it up, and this time you are going to turn it into flour. So that brings us to what type of flour do you want, depending on the species. If you use barley kernels, so you're going to get barley flour. Barley is used in only 2 of the menachos, though, the omer and the minchas sota. The Torah requires certain things for barley, and we'll discuss them now that we've discussed the wheat with all of its stages. There was the threshing, winnowing, the grinding, the shifa and the be'ita, and then the sifting. So that's what brings us to barley flours, which is only for 2 of the korbanos. Again, the omer and the minchas sota use flour from barley. The Torah requires that the omer be milled, the korban omer should be milled from kernels that are kar maleh. They have to be like a full pillow, so to speak. It means that they completely fill the layer of bran that cover them. Meaning the bran is like a shell, a layer around the kernel, and the kernel has to be large enough that it fills that, just like how the filling of a pillow expands to maximum. In order to keep the kernel from shrinking, the barley is not sun-dried. Remember, for the wheat, it was dried in the sun as one of the first steps to get the moisture out. But for the korban omer, you can't do that because you don't want the kernel to shrink. You want it to be full. So you do not dry in the sun the barley for the omer. Rather, as soon as the barley is harvested for the omer, it's gathered and beaten with soft reeds and roots. The purpose for this, again, is to get rid of the chaff. So This is how the chaff is removed without crushing the kernel. You don't want it to reduce in size, and you don't want to crush it. So that's why you're not drying it in the sun, and you're not beating it with something too hard. You're going to beat it only with soft reeds or roots. With winnowing, throwing it up in the wind and the chaff should fly away. So the chaff is going to be gone with the wind. The kernels are then dried over a flame on a perforated pan called an aviv. And let's see a picture of that next to the picture of the barley stalk that you see on the left. On the right, you have the perforated pan that has holes in it. There's really holes in it, in that metal pan. And on top of it, you have the barley kernels, which are being roasted over the fire in order to dry them.